Of Blood and Steel, written by Seymour Zainali, narrated by James Lawrence. Chapter 3. Prisoner of Mind.
By the Maker, she is still here?
Wouldn't know. Balak growled uncaringly as he picked at a thin flatbread packed with meat. He finally had a taste of his favorite kebab. His teeth bit through the warm dough, and the meat exploded with its intense flavor as the ground beef seeped onto his tongue. He could barely pay attention.
Come, don't tell me a teenage girl has driven you out of your favorite watering hole.
Georgi cackled with mirth. He was getting more amusement out of the incident than Balak cared for.
You want me to set her straight?
Enough, Georgi. I'm not in the mood.
Ha! Suit yourself.
Georgi was at work, at least what passed for work in the hollow. His duties were basic. In what amounted to a quarry, he was to guard a fuel stockpile, a ramshackle warehouse constructed of wood and tin, and occasionally patrol the mining tunnel's entrances to make sure none were broken into. All was quiet, so, for a spell, he sat on an upturned crate by a small fire in the main yard. With little else to do that day, Balak had joined him for a flask of spirits, and to fill his friend in on the bizarre encounter he had with Arda the previous night.
Where did you say she was staying? I might offer my services for that much coin, Georgi commented.
Aren't you too old for this shit? Balak took a swig and passed the strong alcohol back to Georgi.
Don't forget, I am 5 years younger than you.
Georgi took a sip of his beverage.
In all seriousness, what's keeping you here? Go, do something worthwhile.
After taking a pipe from his pocket, Georgi wiped it off on his trousers and stuck it between his teeth.
You trying to get rid of me? Not at all. You put yourself down here. You don't have to stay like the majority do. Help her. Take the money. You'll never have to work or fight in this shithole again. And I hear the Iron Gates has the best ale in all of Tartaurus. The one that makes you go blind. You wouldn't want to pass on that.
Yes, but where else am I going to find such delicious kebabs? Balak responded. Georgi laughed. He pulled out a leather pouch and unsheathed the dagger dangling from his belt. He went about carving a plug for his pipe from a brown and green block of dried leaf and bud. Balak scowled. I'm not sure if I'm fit for a long journey. Never mind traveling with a child.
People have been trying to kill you down here for a long time. What difference does it make?
Georgi argued. He stuffed the plug in the bowl and searched himself for matches. Least here I know people want me dead. It can be hard to tell a friend from a foe up there.
You should help her and get out of this place for a while.
Balak tossed his friend his own matches, shaking his head as he did so. Maybe I like it here.
Nobody likes it here.
Luxury is a state of mind, brother.
Balak, when was the last time you stepped outside? You live in this shithole. For what?
He lit up, striking the tinder off of his cheek. Sucking the dancing flame into the bowl, he puffed hard 3 times and held his bounty in his lungs as long as he could. With a gasp, a billow of musty smoke escaped him, and he passed the pipe to his friend. There's nothing on the surface for me.
You deserve better.
Balak grinned. We both know that's not true.
Get yourself to the surface and help the poor girl out. I would if I could, but maybe I could see my own little girl before it is over for me. But then, who would be saving your arse from the pit?
The pair erupted in raucous laughter, the kind that came straight from the belly. Balak was far from a social creature, but Georgi was all right with him. He appreciated good beer, good food, small talk, and good fights, and 9 times out of 10, he never wanted to discuss anything all that serious or irritating. He was the closest thing Balak had to a friend, a solitary role.
Still, it's a shame, all the same, Georgi said. What is? Nothing.
Georgi waved him away dismissively, theatrically.
Just the girl. Sorry, girls. Poor things will be dead before they reach the place. Georgi. Now let's just hope it's the beasts that get them. I'd hate to think what would happen to such a pretty young girl if a horde of bandits got a hold of her. I've known you long enough to know what you're doing. Of course, they'll probably just kill the infant before they have their way with the girl, snap its neck, hurl it off a cliff. Hey, the land is at war, times are hard, so maybe they'll eat it, roast it on a spit. You are a sick bastard. Maybe you need to cut back on the pixie dust. Besides, that's not going to work on me. She'll find somebody else. Down here? Oh, of course. I'm sure any one of these deprived whoresons would be more than happy to take her under their wing. Fuck, Georgi. If you care so much, why don't you take her to the Iron Gates? She didn't ask me, brother. All right, out with it.
Balak grabbed the booze, bracing himself for one of his friend's rare lectures. He could feel it coming on like a bad rash.
What's this all about? You ever stop and take a look around this place, Balak? Not like I have much choice. I'm being serious. Look at these people. They're all running from something. The law, debt, bounty hunters. Well, you get my point. You were here long before I arrived, and I've been here for 8 fucking years. I had to run to keep my family safe. I never got to see my daughter grow up, and since I met you, you haven't told me why you can't go up again. Not once. What is it, Balak? What scares you? How many more times can I ask you this? Lost count some time back. That's saying something. People live in the hollow because they've got no other choice. The question is, do you have a choice? I'm not asking what brought you down here, but is it still up there? Do you really need to be here? What have you got to lose that you haven't already lost? There's nothing up there. That's the point, Georgi. There's nothing down here, Balak, so go up there and find something. Anything. This place is the last resort, the anus of Tartaurus. So tell me, you got shackles on your wrists. Are you really trapped here like the rest of us? You're beginning to repeat yourself. Because I don't think you are, brother. Everyone else here is fearful of what's out there, but not you. I think it's something, or someone, that's keeping you here. Why are you keeping yourself here? The crooks are relieved to be out of the eyes of the law, and the families are scared that the law's going to come down here after them. You, however, are neither, Georgi hypothesized. If you're so clever, why don't you cut to the chase and spare me the lecture? Balak said. Call it the gut feeling, but if you ask me, I think you could walk out of here any time you wanted. You're just too fucking stubborn to do it. A bold statement. One I'm sure you'll shed no light on as usual, but you've got an opportunity here, Balak. You've got a chance. The way you tell it, this job would leave you with enough coin to buy land, settle down, live out the rest of your days in peace and quiet and comfort. There's folk around here who would kill for that kind of prospect. Even putting aside setting yourself up for life, it would get you out of here. Don't you want that?
I have thought about it many times.
You're a sad bastard. You know that, don't you?
Don't start, Georgi. I'm not going, and that's final.
Sure. Stay down here with the rest of us. I think you've been smacked in that head of yours one too many times. Fuck off out of here. Use your skills for good. What's fucking wrong with you, man?
That's it. I'm leaving.
Balak jumped down and looked at Georgi. Georgi swung back his arm and punched him in the face.
Out of respect for our friendship, I'll pretend that never happened. But try hitting me again and suffer the consequences,
Balak growled. Georgi raised a clenched fist, ready to strike at Balak's face.
I would, if I didn't feel so much darn pity for you.
He lowered his hand.
I don't need your pity.
Balak stormed away.
Why don't you go drink yourself to death, Balak? Isn't that what you're good at? And one day I won't be around to drag you out of the pit. What will you do then?
Balak lifted his heavy boot and launched an empty barrel toward Georgi. Balak ground his teeth together. His knuckles creaked and cracked as he drove his fingers into the palm of his hand. He swung his fist at a wall. It stung, so he pulled his arm back swiftly and examined the wound by scraping the skin away. Small specks of red dampened his knuckles. He winced, but didn't make a sound. He headed down some side alleys leading toward the pit. 3 figures emerged from the corner. Balak held his head up as he walked by, but they were quiet as he passed. They went by many names: silencers, mage seekers, spell breakers, cast trappers, but in the hollow everyone called them Nimrods, a profession he had once considered. They occasionally appeared in the hollow if they had been hunting mages in the area. They rarely traveled in groups, so this must have been a special occasion. Another Nimrod marched past Balak. He was dragging a woman, but her face was locked away by a large mechanical contraption, a jawbreaker. Try forcing your way out, and it would split your lower jaw from your head. The mage was unable to utter a single word due to its tongue depressor. She made a squealing sound as her saliva dripped onto the ground, and she fought against the Nimrod's grip. She was trying to pull away, but her hands and feet were bound. An iron device in the shape of a glove covered her fingers and hands. She must have worn it for a long time, as her wrists had turned purple. She would be taken far to the north, to Zindan, where she would be kept until the end of her days.
No slowing down,
the Nimrod ordered the mage. Balak turned the corner and headed into the pit. It was packed, and he had to push his way through the crowds of men before he finally reached it. He nodded toward the barman, who brought him a jug of beer with a ready-filled cup. Balak raked in his pocket and threw the remainder of his silver onto the bar.
"Will you be fighting tonight, friend?"
a man called over the bar.
"Looks like it,"
Balak grumbled, emptying the contents of his cup down his throat. The crowd roared as another fight came to blows in the pit. After emptying the remainder of his jug, Balak headed to the pit.
"Sign me up,"
he told the man at the door. The man nodded. Balak stood back and watched as a skeletal man threw a feeble punch toward an older, white-haired man with a long beard. The white-haired man moved swiftly, but the skinny man was punch-drunk. The skinny man smiled, exposing 2 missing front teeth as he wobbled back and forth and then fell backward, crashing against the cage. His vest hung loosely from his body. The skin on his arms was just as slack. He pushed himself forward and stumbled. The older man lunged at him. The skinny man's head swung around fast, and the side of his face smashed against the cage. He slid down the sharp cage and slumped onto the floor. The crowd jeered as the organizer counted out the skinny man. He didn't move, just groaned. 2 men came in and dragged him out by his feet.
"You're up next,"
the doorman told Balak. He grabbed the side of the cage and pulled himself into the ring. Some cheered, while others whispered. The white-haired man cautiously headed toward Balak, shielding his face with his hands. He threw a punch at Balak, and it struck his jaw, but his head barely moved. He just smiled at the older man, baring his teeth. The white-haired man shook his hand and glared at Balak. He pulled his arms up swiftly to shield his face once more, but the force of Balak's first blow knocked them backward into the man's face. He took 2 steps back and peered over his hands. His eyes widened as Balak took a step toward him and leaned in with a left hook. The man lifted from his feet and flew toward the rear of the cage. Balak was on him. He punched him again, and blood squirted from the man's mouth.
"Stay down,"
Balak told him. The man obeyed. Balak continued to fight and win, but after 3 fights his ribs ached.
"Count me out,"
he told the doorman.
"I need a drink."
The bar in the pit was busy, so Balak took himself out the back door and through the desolate streets of the hollow. It was quiet. The only sound was the scurrying of rats running through the infested streets. They moved cautiously and stopped now and then to look at him, but they did not run away. He heard a man's deep scream in the next street, and he stopped for a moment to listen. Men were shouting their slurred words at one another, but Balak shrugged and continued on to the miners' tavern.
"Just gonna sit here and get pissed,"
he told the barman with a nod, and the barman brought over another 2 jugs. This time it was a smartly dressed middle-aged man. He had dark, sleek hair and a large mustache, no beard. Balak recognized him as the tavern owner. "If you're looking for your friend, she's in her room. She leaves in the morning." He coughed discreetly.
"I don't have friends."
"Women," the barman remarked, shaking his head. Balak downed the first jug. A woman wearing a scarf walked by him. She was carrying a Comanche, and she carefully set the instrument down in the corner. She took out a bow and sat on the floor before placing the wooden bowl-shaped part of the stringed instrument between her knees. Then she moved back and forth in a mesmerizing way to the exotic tune. Balak swallowed down the next jug and rose. He wanted the quiet of his own bed, so he headed out of the bar. As he left, he was met again with the dank air of the hollow. He staggered, a little dizzy, but alcohol never affected him for long, and after a few moments he walked away from the bar and headed up the alley the 3 men had emerged from earlier. Balak arrived at Georgi's place, ready to talk again. He stood outside Georgi's apartment, and after taking a deep breath, he said,
"Georgi, we need to talk. I think you earned the right to know. Why don't you open the fucking door? I like to look a man in the eyes when I talk to him. Georgi, are you home?"
Balak tried to knock on the door one more time before seeing that it was unlocked. It opened at the slightest touch, exposing a glimpse of light shining through. Balak reached out for his battle axe. He slammed the door open and was met with a ruined apartment. He paused for a second before entering.
"This doesn't make sense,"
Balak growled. He carefully examined the place. Nobody was home. Georgi's things were haphazardly thrown around the house. Every possible door was open, every nook investigated. The floor was covered with dozens of letters dating all the way back to Georgi's first arrival.
Every letter was addressed to Marie Kardov, Georgi's daughter. Balak sighed at the letters, which had never been sent. As he picked one of them up, his hands trembled. He started to look over the letters, but suddenly he heard screams outside. It sounded like a grown man. He rushed toward the sound, peeking at every corner and alley, but each time he saw only drunks, beggars, and men getting high on pixie dust. The whole place was constructed like a maze, but Balak knew he was getting closer. At last, he came across the silhouette of a man fighting off 3 armed men. He couldn't tell if this was his old friend.
"Georgi!"
Balak called out. The alley had no lights, but when Georgi answered with silence, Balak intervened. He came from behind one of the soldiers and threw him out of the way. Balak stepped forward to get a good look at the man when he hit him in the face.
"Balak?"
the voice clamored. Balak finally recognized Georgi's voice.
"What is this?"
he asked.
"Fight now! Talk later!"
Balak stood with Georgi back to back as they fought the remaining 2 soldiers. The soldiers swung their swords, and the 2 friends dodged their blades and threw some jabs when they could. Balak's fist pummeled a soldier's leaden armor, but it had little effect. Balak slammed him into a wall and rushed to help Georgi, who was backing up. Georgi charged forward and fought the man to the ground.
"Behind you!"
screamed Georgi, but he knew Balak would never be able to stop the blow in time. Georgi jumped between the sword and Balak. Georgi then held on to the sword to disarm the soldier. He pushed the soldier away with his foot. Balak took his chance and lifted the man by his chest plate and dumped him head first onto the ground, fracturing his skull and dislocating his neck.
"Glad it is over,"
breathed Georgi as he leaned against the wall and slid down it onto his arse. Balak knelt to examine Georgi's wounds.
"Don't worry, we can fix you. When you wake up, you'll forget this ever happened."
"Balak," Georgi coughed. Blood fell from his mouth, and his breathing slowed.
"Don't move. You're bleeding hard. I'm gonna go get you help."
Balak looked around, but all he saw were bodies of soldiers. There had been a few people watching from the top floors, possibly investigating the source of the screams, but as soon as the fight was over, they all closed their windows and dimmed their lights.
"Come on, let's get you home,"
Balak reassured him, hooking his arm underneath his friend's shoulder.
"Oh, yeah. You're a bastard. Won't even let the man die in peace."
Balak's arm cradling Georgi's ribs was soaking wet. Carefully he placed Georgi on the ground by the glow of the lantern. The liquid on his arm formed a thick brown-colored crust. Georgi was pale, and his clothing was drenched in blood.
"Don't get soft on me now, brother,"
Balak commanded.
"Find Marie,"
Georgi whispered to Balak and handed him an amulet. Balak held Georgi's hand as it grew colder and lost its strength. He drew his last breath, and all was silent. Balak ran his fingers over his friend's eyelids and gently laid him down. Balak heard a man trying to crawl away nearby. He rose and grabbed his bloodied axe.
No, please, I was just following orders. Please, I have a family,"
the soldier pleaded. Balak swung his axe right into the soldier's face.